There's been a lot of talk about Mike Zimmer getting fired maybe mid-season, and that makes us kind of think about the successor a little bit. And maybe that guy's in the building already. What about Andre Patterson? Let's think about it. Let's talk about it here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
Ooh-wee! You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode of the Locked On Vikings is brought to you by McDonald's, proudly serving communities since 1965. McDonald's has always been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's an unofficial community center. A big thank you to our friends at McDonald's for always being there. I'm loving it. Today on the show, it is Crossover Thursday. So most of the show is going to be a talk about the Ravens. We are putting this stupid Cowboys game behind us. We're not talking about it anymore. It is time to focus on the next one. Lamar Jackson, we got to go to Baltimore. We got to try to get an improbable win, see if we can't get this season back on the rails. So we're going to talk about all of that. And they're going through a whole bunch of their own interesting stuff too. So really interesting conversation. Can't wait to share it with you. But first, a few bits of news. And I also kind of want to talk about Andre Patterson a little bit. So let's rattle through all of that. First off, a little bit of injury news. Michael Pierce practiced, and according to sources that talked to Courtney Cronin at ESPN, and I believe Chris Thomason at Pioneer Press, Michael Pierce is going to play in this game, which is awesome, right? Revenge game and all that stuff. So we're going to get Michael Pierce. That is going to be huge, of course, against a run-heavy team like the Ravens. And by run-heavy, it's not just option routes and getting Lamar Jackson in space and all that stuff. They have a vaunted run game as well that Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens is about to talk to you about. So if you want to know more about it, stick around. But Michael Pierce is going to come in handy for like all of that stuff. Also, Barr and Dantzler didn't practice. Both of them have injuries. Barr's still dealing with the knee and stuff. I think this is just going to kind of be his season. He's just going to be in and out of practice and maybe in and out of games. He seemed a lot faster in that Cowboys game. I really liked the game he had. I know people don't like the missed tackle. Go listen to the end of yesterday's episode. If you disagree with me on that, I don't really care about it. But sucks to not have him if he can't go, but we'll see. Also, the Vikings picked up a waiver claim. They got a guy named Jonah Williams, not that Jonah Williams. He's a defensive end. He was on the Rams. But in a press conference, Andre Patterson said that Kenny Willekes and Pat Jones were going to get opportunities. I don't know if this guy's going to take those away, but he is on the active 53-man roster. Thanks to Danielle Hunter going on IR, the Vikings roster is actually at 51 players before Jonah Williams. So they actually have an extra roster spot as well. Luke Stalker, the tight end, is out of practice squad elevations. I actually think he's played pretty well. He's been mostly a blocker, so it's hard to notice, but I think he's played pretty well. And so I think maybe he gets that spot, or maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's Kenny Willekes himself, who is still on the practice squad. He just got an elevation in the Cowboys game and played well. Something like that might happen. So there's all of that stuff. But let me talk to you about Andre Patterson, because there is this, I feel like this voice in the back of all of our heads, right? Mike Zimmer might get fired middle of the season, might get fired after the season. Feels like he's on the ropes though, right? So we start thinking about the successor. And whenever I see articles or think pieces kind of saying, hey, this guy should be the next coach or whatever, it's always the offensive guys. It's Brian Daboll, it's Byron Leftwich. It's basically take any good offense, who's the offensive coordinator, let's make that guy our head coach, right? And I want to think a little harder about that. When I look for a new head coaching candidate, and if Mike Zimmer gets fired, we'll talk about this a ton. We'll talk about this exhaustively. So don't worry about it. But basically, the way that I plan on approaching that is what is their coaching reputation? Who have they coached? Who have they developed? That's a big thing. If they are an offensive coordinator, who are they position coaches for? And what I'm looking for is who can be a leader of men. Because there are a lot of people who can be whiteboard gurus, right? A lot of X's and O's guys that can be fantastic on the whiteboard, that can design all these things, sort of, offensive coordinator in the booth. But those guys are kind of removed. They're strategists, and strategists are great. But I want to make sure that it's somebody who worked with people and who can lead people, who can lead a locker room. And that is infinitely more important to me then was it an offensive or defensive coach? There's a lot of stuff about it. It's just got to be an offensive guy. And it'll probably be an offensive guy because it's just the climate in Minnesota. But I don't care at all if it was an offensive or defensive guy that comes in next. I could not care less if it's offensive or defensive. I don't think there's necessarily, like, there's a lot of analytics out there. There's a lot of narrative out there that says offense is more important than defense, so prioritize your offense. And I just disagree that one side of the ball is more important than the other. Every play from scrimmage, there's offense on the field, there's defense on the field. And every single play from scrimmage, both units are mattering. They're playing against each other. And I think the desire to reduce it into one is important and one isn't, I kind of think is missing the forest for the trees. So I don't care at all if it's offensive or defensive, and that allows me to consider Andre Patterson, who is absolutely checking that leader of men box. And all the press conferences that he's come out and talked about, scheme, where he's talked about, what it's like to be on a losing team and, no, we're not going to give up. We got to play not to lose was a big thing that he said. I mean, he's saying all sorts of the right things, but they're not the PR right things. They are, he's really speaking candidly, and I love that. I'm really partial to that in press conferences, and who he is in press conferences is not who he is, with the players and stuff. So whatever. But I really like the idea of giving Andre Patterson an interim chance. If you want a reason to fire Mike Zimmer in the middle of the season, that's the reason. I love giving him a chance. I know it's the same staff. I know it sounds like it might be more of the same, and it's another defensive coach, but I don't think Andre Patterson would be the same coach as Mike Zimmer. I don't think he'd be as conservative. I don't think he'd be, and that's a big thing with people don't want defensive coaches because we all think that defensive coaches are entirely conservative. Look at Brandon Staley, man. I mean, there are defensive coaches out there look at Bill Belichick of all people. He's remember that 4th and 2 a bunch of years ago? He's a defensive coach, right? So I don't think being a defensive coach is necessarily being a conservative coach. It's just the side of the ball you came up on. And offensive coaches are going to have the exact same coordinator problem that defensive coaches have with offensive coordinators, right? Zimmer can't hold down an offensive coordinator. Offensive coaches have a lot more trouble holding down defensive coordinators. Defensive coordinators don't get as many head coaching jobs, so if you have a good one, it's more difficult. But I mean, look, Brandon Staley left, right? Robert Saleh left and went and got a head coaching job. It still happens if your guy is good enough. So you still have that kind of continuity issue. I'm not worried about any of those. All are tertiary things, right? Those are all little edges that are worth considering, but they aren't central to the issue. What I want is a leader of men who is a good strategist on his side of the ball, right? And in that order. I want somebody who will lead a team. I want somebody who, when you are 0-3, can make a season out of it, right? I want somebody who is able to turn things around. I want somebody who can give a halftime speech that turns a loss into a win. That's what I want in a head coach. And you can't measure that. You just got to make a judgment call on it. And that's okay. That's going to be difficult, but that's okay. And all of this only comes up if Mike Zimmer gets fired, which is not a sure thing at all, right? Zimmer rattles off 3 wins here. We forget about that Cowboys game real quick. And to that end, let's talk about the Ravens. I asked Kevin Ostreicher about the Ravens. He asked me about the Vikings. Let's go do that conversation. I'm excited to share that whole conversation with you. But first, this episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by McDonald's, proudly serving communities since 1965. McDonald's is a great place because it is more than just a place to get tasty and affordable food. It's a place to stop. It's a place to recharge and rest, recuperate. It's a place on a rest stop that you see those golden arches. You are absolutely pulling over when you're on a 6-hour drive and you're 3 hours into it and you're getting hungry. You see those golden arches. It's happening. Come on. It's a place to stop, get a cup of coffee, recharge, use their Wi-Fi, right? When I was in high school, McDonald's was a gathering place of sorts. We would always go grab a little bit of McDonald's. It was something we would kind of enjoy, or maybe even stop off after a Little League game or whatever, win or lose, right? So head on down to your local McDonald's to refuel and reconnect. McDonald's, I'm loving it. Let me also talk to you about Get Upside. It's an app that can save you money on gas. And who doesn't want to do that? Gas prices suck, and you can shave a little bit off the top with Get Upside. They can save you up to $0.25 a gallon, up to 25 cents a gallon. You just download the app. It's free on the Google Play or App Store, and it can start saving you money. It just shows you all the gas stations that are participating that you can go get gas, fill up your tank, and save up to 25 cents a gallon. Also, you can enter promo code TOUCHDOWN and get an extra 25 cents a gallon on your first fill up. So that's 50 cents a gallon on your first fill up just for getting the Get Upside app and using promo code TOUCHDOWN. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. And without further ado, let's go talk to Kevin Oestreicher.
We are here, Locked On Ravens, Locked On Vikings, another edition of a crossover Thursday. Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens here with Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings. And Luke, this Week 9 matchup between these two teams, I think it'll be a bit better than some people anticipate. I know Baltimore coming off of a loss in Week 7, they had their bye. In Week 8, Minnesota coming off of that loss to the Dallas Cowboys with Cooper Rush. Both teams, kind of going through a bit of a crisis period here, but one of these teams will have to come out victorious unless they want to tie for some reason.
Y'all are what, 5-2? It's fine. You'll be all right.
and look, considering all the injuries, I will definitely take it with this Baltimore Ravens team. But starting off with this Vikings team, Luke, we have to start with Kirk Cousins and just what he has been for this Vikings team this year. Completing 69% of his passes, 1,953 yards, 14 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. How impressed or not have you been with Kirk Cousins this year so far?
If you asked me this question this time last week, I would be like, yeah, he's been playing really, really well. And he was playing awesome. He was everything was accurate. He was in rhythm. And I think that's really important for him to be kind of in the flow of the game and be, the balls were arriving on time and he was doing things difficult to defend. And it fell apart on Sunday Night Football. Really one of the worst games we've had from him in a while. And the thing about Kirk Cousins is he's streaky. So he will have like a whole bunch of really good games, but whatever he did last week is not necessarily what he's going to do this week. So maybe he's in a cold streak and you get him in a slump. Maybe that was just one game and they turn it around or something like that. It's kind of hard to ever know what you're going to get out of him. But what you have to know about Kirk Cousins is he is a paint by numbers quarterback. He is very much an in structure, and he actually defends that as a part of his game. He says, I don't want to go out of structure. I want to prepare and then lean on that preparation. And he's just doesn't have the improv gene. That's the definition of Kirk Cousins. It's paint by numbers quarterback. A lot. The other metaphor I like to use is there are bakers and there are chefs, and there's nothing really wrong with being one or the other. It's just a different thing to defend. Lamar Jackson's a chef. He'll run around. He'll make something happen. Kirk Cousins, he's a baker. He follows a recipe and he will follow it with unbelievable precision, fantastic arm, really good talent. He's got a little bit of scramble to him as well, but he's always going to stay on the recipe. He will never color outside the lines.
Yeah, definitely. And the Vikings, they have very talented skill position players, and I think they can do some damage to a Baltimore defense. But I think also it's important to talk about the offensive line from Minnesota. How impressed have you been with them, again, or not with them, how they've really pass blocked for Kirk Cousins, run blocked for Dalvin Cook? How have they been as a unit this season?
It's been a bugaboo for a decade for the Vikings. His offensive line, it's never been good back since they drafted Matt Khalil in 2012. It was kind of downhill from there. But they have a rookie starting right now in Christian Darrisaw, who has, I thought, been pretty good. And not without his rookie mistakes, but less rookie mistakes than usual rookies, which is probably a good sign. They've got Ezra Cleveland, who is a second-year player. He's a tackle playing left guard, and he looks like a tackle playing guard. He's a little bit slow out of his stance and stuff, and he's not too used to that. And they also have a tackle playing right guard in Oli Udoh. The two kind of more seasoned guys, Brian O'Neill, he's been fantastic. He's the right tackle they just paid a huge contract to. And then there's Garrett Bradbury, the center, who I might be the last fan of his in Minnesota. They call him the Grim Reacher. He's a really good reach block guy, and he kind of makes it unlocks a lot of zone runs that otherwise you couldn't unlock against certain fronts, things you would usually have to check out of, but because he can reach block a 3 technique, which is insane, he has a lot of lateral mobility that really helps that. But if you have a strong nose tackle, and I don't know who you guys have on the defensive line, but if you have a strong, powerful nose tackle, you can walk him back into Kirk Cousins' lap, and that's obviously a lot more frustrating than the subtleties of a reach block.
Yeah, well, Brandon Williams, has struggled a bit this season for the Ravens, but hopefully he can get it back on track. He was bullied in Cincinnati, or I guess they were in Baltimore. But yeah, he did not have a great game. There are multiple plays where they were highlighted by Bengals Twitter accounts where Brandon Williams literally got pushed back and fell on the ground.
So unstoppable force versus movable object. Let's go.
Yes, maybe we'll see a good matchup there. Right, exactly. Moving on to the Ravens defense and how they can, or moving on to the Vikings defense and how they can stop this Ravens offense. Danielle Hunter's a very big loss. I think that can't be understated. Who are some other guys? Obviously, Everson Griffin is there. Who are some other guys who are going to have to step up in his absence against the Ravens offensive line right now that is also searching for some answers?
Yeah, Griffin's back. He was every bit the player he had been for us in like 2019, which is crazy because he fell off so much at Detroit and Dallas, but he's back. He's the guy. They also have DJ Wanham, who's a second-year player who I'm going to call him coming into his own. He didn't have the best rookie year by my account, but the coaches swear by him. And he actually had a pretty hot game against Dallas. So we'll see. He's a big unknown, but he gets to start now. And they've got a couple of other rotational guys coming in. They just picked somebody up off the waiver wire from the Rams. And they also have Kenny Willekes and Patrick Jones, a couple of draft picks that we haven't seen a lot from. But they're both kind of high motor types. So we'll see. Interestingly, Patrick Jones, so he played in the ACC, and the ACC has a million option quarterbacks. And so he's going to make his NFL debut actually in this game with Daniil Hunter out against the only option team in the league. So, or the most like option heavy run team in the league. So we'll see if that skill set helps him out.
Yeah, it's funny how those matchups work now. You got to get a player who has that experience, so it could work in the favor of the Vikings there. But I think, Luke, moving on to the secondary, Harrison Smith and it's all, it's tough. Xavier Woods leads this team with 2 interceptions. If you want to put a positive, maybe
Xavier Woods has been good.
Right.
Harrison Smith is Harrison Smith. We know he's good. He's been good forever. It's the corners are trouble, though. They don't have Patrick Peterson. Cameron Dantzler and Bashad Breeland are not playing with any confidence at all. Dallas, in the last game, got a million plays of just 12-yard hitches because these guys are playing so far off because they're so scared of being beat deep. So you either have to spend your safeties on helping those guys over the top, but then you can't use your safeties on anything else, and you're running cover 2, and cover 2 is really easy to beat. So, yeah, it's kind of a rock and a hard place with Bashad Breeland and Cameron Dantzler. If you want to attack the Vikings, you're attacking them on the outside with those 2 guys. Back with Kevin Ostreicher in a bit, but first, let me talk to you about Grambling, because the way you can go Gramble on BetOnline.ag is new and improved, and it's awesome. I have absolutely been loving their live betting apparatus. You feel a game kind of going away, you feel a momentum shift of sorts, and you can kind of say, I think this team's going to make a comeback. You can get their money line at plus 200 because they're down 10 points. That is how I've been having a lot of success at BetOnline. But you can bet whatever you want. You can just bet spreads, over-unders, you can bet player props, parlays, all sorts of stuff. Pro, college football, basketball, hockey, whatever you want. Just go to betonline.ag. If you haven't signed up, that's free to do, and enter promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, and you can get a 50% welcome bonus. That's promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, all one word, for a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Whatever your first deposit is, $100, $1,000, you will get half of that placed right into your account as free play money. That is just for going to betonline.ag, signing up, doing your first deposit, and entering promo code LOCKEDON. All right, y'all, it's crossover Thursday. That means you got me, Luke Braun, at Luke Braun NFL from Locked On Vikings, talking to Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens at KOstreicher34. So I want to know about the Ravens. Obviously, when you get an AFC team, it's like, I don't know anything about them. I haven't had no reason to watch anything, right? So I guess let's start with, should I be more worried about Lamar Jackson on the ground or Lamar Jackson through the air? Obviously, he's done a lot of things in both ways, but if I had to pick one to really kind of angle my defense towards stopping, which should I be more scared of?
Yeah, it's a really complex question because what the Ravens have done this year through the air has been, really good. Lamar Jackson was expected to take a 4th-year leap, and he's done it. He just looks a lot calmer in the pocket, a lot more cool. He's just confident. And he's shown that sometimes he can hold the ball for a bit too long and into sacks. The deep ball accuracy isn't completely there yet. But the thing with Lamar Jackson on the ground is that if your defense does everything right and stops everything, Lamar Jackson can still make a play out of it. So if you want to stop one or the other, the Ravens have done a better job this year at not letting that dictate a game. I know all of the narrative surrounding this team has been, if you can stop the run, the Ravens can't win the game because they can't throw the football, when in reality, they could do that a couple years ago, and they still can do it now. So
yeah, it hasn't been that way for a while, yeah?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So Lamar Jackson has grown every single year, and he's continued that. If I had to give, a concrete answer, I'd say to be more worried about him through the air, because the Ravens want to identify that part of their game as something that is a strength. They have done that so far this season, and they're really putting an emphasis on it. Their run game has not been as advertised this season. They lost, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins just 10 days or around 10 days before the regular season started. they bring in guys like, former Viking Latavius Murray. They have Le'Veon Bell in there as well as Devonta Freeman. So it's not 2016 anymore, unfortunately. Lamar Jackson's still doing Lamar Jackson things on the ground, but his running backs aren't helping him out as much as they, I think, should be at this point. So for now, I think the Ravens are putting an emphasis on throwing the football, but at the same time, this is still a run-first team. They can just throw the football and throw it well now. They've been doing it, but this year it just feels a bit different.
Gotcha. And speaking of revenge games, Michael Pierce is going to make his return to the field. He's been out with an elbow injury, and he finally gets to go up. He should play this, barring a setback, he should play in this game. So that should be really fun. And that kind of leads me to ask about the protection and the kind of matchup in the trenches there. Because, I mean, look, no matter how high-flying an offense is, no matter how talented the quarterback is, you get pressure on him and you're going to make it struggle. So I guess if you were in the Vikings defensive coach's room, if you were in a coach's meeting with them, and you were going to suggest, okay, here's what I think you have to do to get pressure on Lamar Jackson and get that offense to start to kind of break apart at the seams. What are you, should we blitz? Shouldn't we blitz? What are you suggesting?
I think it's a healthy balance and just figuring out what works early on. This Ravens offensive line, to put it nicely, is in shambles. It's okay. It's not been great this year. They have gotten really solid play from Kevin Zeitler, the right guard there. He's played very well. Bradley Bozeman also has shown some things, but the tackle situation is just dire straits right now. They lost Ronnie Stanley for the year after he played just one game. He suffered a pretty gruesome ankle injury in 2020 in the middle of the year, and he just has not recovered. He had to have another ankle surgery, so he's done. Patrick McCary, who's been playing very well at right tackle as a fill-in, had a high ankle sprain in week 7. He's not going to be back in this one. So now the Ravens are working with Alejandro Villanueva, who has been their left tackle for a while. He's a very up and down player. He'll look great for a quarter and then look really bad for another. They also are now seemingly working with Tyree Phillips, who was more of a guard at this stage of his career. He's kind of their swing guy at right tackle. He did not look amazing against the Bengals, and they signed Cedric Ogbuehi to the practice squad, a former first-round pick, formerly of the Bengals and of the Seahawks as well. He, I asked people about him, and the word was turnstile, so that's not a great early season early indication of what he can bring. If they can get pressure with 4 or even 5, if they want to send a guy, and that's working, I wouldn't necessarily stress the defense and say, let's bring 6 or 7 and put guys in one-on-one situations with Marquise Brown or Rashad Bateman or Mark Andrews or whoever. If you want to take away a couple of those options, if you're getting pressure with 4, I'd stick it that way.
Gotcha. So let's flip to the other side of this, I guess, because the offense has had a lot of struggles. And they have a similar offensive line problem, right? Except it's made out of only tackles instead of made out of only converted guards. So that's why I laughed. Like, we have a bit of the opposite situation there. But there's that problem. Kirk Cousins has had some check down problems and stuff. But I guess if you can play disciplined against the run and do that without keeping, without sacrificing your safeties, you can kind of suffocate. You can choke this defense out. So I guess that is my question. Is the run defense good enough to not have to put an extra player in the box to stop Dalvin Cook, or are they going to have to leave guys one-on-one with Justin Jefferson?
Yes and no. I think it's going to depend on if Derek Wolfe can come back this week. He was designated to return from IR, and Wolfe was one of the best run defenders in the NFL last season, but he's been out with hip and neck issues. So he's been on the shelf ever since about the second week of training camp against the team with Dalvin Cook on their roster. If they're not stopping him, if they can't tackle, the Ravens have been one of the worst tackling defenses in the NFL this season. And if they can't bring him down, for example, that Jamar Chase 82-yard touchdown in week 7, it would have been a 6-yard gain if he was tackled. So if they cannot bring Dalvin Cook to the ground, they're going to have to put reinforcements in the box, and that will leave one-on-one matchups. But if they can fix those issues, then I think they can leave some guys out of it, and all of a sudden they could try to focus on taking away some pass-catching threats from Minnesota.
I think last I checked BetOnline, the line was Ravens favored by 5.5 points. You got a pick in you?
For me, I think this is a Ravens win in terms of right around 5 points. I'll give it to the Ravens by a touchdown. I think that this could be a game that is a little closer than people anticipate. I think Minnesota does have talent on both sides of the football. Obviously, losing to Danielle Hunter is very huge for them on that defense. But I think if it does come down to a close game, I'm taking the Lamar Jackson effect and even the Justin Tucker effect over a guy like Kirk Cousins and Greg Joseph. Yeah, so I think if I had to pick a duo, I'm taking Jackson and Tucker. But you know, the Ravens, it's going to come down to the tackling. It's going to come down to if they can get off to a fast start. I think that's very important. If they can get off to like a 14-3 start, 17-7 start, that could really set the tone early, and the Ravens could maybe use that ball control offense to control the time possession battle and take 9, 10, 11 minutes off the clock per drive, which is what they become really good at over the course of the last couple of seasons. So, yeah, I think it'll be Baltimore. I'll give it to them by a touchdown, but this game could be sneaky good, I think.
I think I'm about in the same spot as you, honestly. I just don't believe that the Vikings offensively have enough variation to fool an NFL defense that has remotely done their homework. And maybe you can overcome that if Dalvin Cook just breaks a million tackles and it doesn't matter what the coaches did. But it feels like the path to victory here is going to have to be out executing because I just don't trust the staff right now to out game plan John Harbaugh's staff. So I think I'm going to go Ravens with a touchdown as well. For more on all of this, Vikings fans, go check out Kevin's podcast, do a little bit of scouting beyond enemy lines. I invite Ravens fans to come hang out with me too. Kevin, thank you so much for hanging out here on Crossover Thursday.
Yeah, Luke, thanks so much. It was a blast, and I am really looking forward to this game.
So I'm fascinated with this run game. I'm fascinated with what Andre Patterson said about the run game and how they're like the only true option team in the league, and how he said that's different than the Cardinals, who I thought were an option team. So I have some learning to do. So I'm excited to go do that learning and then bring it to you. And that'll be tomorrow's show. In the meantime, head over to the Peacock and Williamson podcast. They're covering everything from the national angle, probably talking a lot about the Raiders. That Henry Ruggs thing's just awful. But go check that out if you want to learn more about that or whatever else is going on in the league. Probably a Thursday night preview as well here on this Thursday. I will see you all tomorrow, and as always, Skol.